What's up guys, Engineering Aquariums coming at you with this new video. Today I'm going to be exploring my dashboard setup on the Apex Fusion and also how to make sure everything is easy to check at a glance. I'm going to go through some of my numbers and some tricks for pH that you can implement during this downtime. At the end of the video I'm going to go through some links for useful information that you may not have seen with the current situation going on in the world. So starting off, we have my main dashboard with the on, off, and auto switches. I like to only keep things that are set to auto on the dashboard. Any outlet not being used is deleted, but can be found by pressing the unlock button at the top of the dashboard. If there's something that is normally set off, but I occasionally turn it on, I simply type in the script screen, fallback off, set off, and then I leave it on auto in this main dashboard. This is because during water changes I have to turn pumps and heaters off, and I like to make sure that when I turn everything back on, things are actually back to where they should be. Before I used this system, I would occasionally forget to turn on a pump or heater, which was devastating if I did my water changes later at night. I also keep things in the order that they are plugged in on the outlets, so I easily know what to unplug and replace or permanently unplug if it's unplugged. This is a common theme for my Apex. The other common theme is that I separate my two tanks by a noticeable amount. So for example, the set above the clock is where my 20-gallon cube outlets are, and below the clock is where I have my frag tank outlets. Next we have my optical switch set up in a similar way so that the first four are my 20-gallon cube and the following four switches are my frag tank. That way I can differentiate the two tanks and have the ones that are normally set on in the center. Because there's only 8, it's not that difficult to differentiate, and I don't have a major header in between the two. I've had some issues with optical switches, so I really like to keep these in order, as I commonly have to unplug and replug them back in to make sure that they're working properly, or replace them entirely. As we see at the bottom, I've labeled E, the number 4, and frag, because this is the 4th optical switch on the frag tank that is empty or unused. I have my dosing pumps set up with the idea that I was going to do water changes on both tanks, with the top set of pumps being for the 20-gallon cube and the very bottom set being for the frag tank. I've since gone to manual changes as it gives me a better sense of what's going on in the tank and keeps me in touch with how things are fluctuating. I found in the past that dosing more than basic elements that need to be dosed consistently throughout the day tends to create a gap between the aquarist and the tank itself. I would often check those bottles with dosing liquids that would then appear to have been empty for at least a week. This was also true when I tried automating water changes for a little while. Time would get away from me and I would forget when I had to refill everything. I implemented a FFM on my water change, but the other bottles would still find themselves empty. I do plan to use these for a calcium reactor in the future, and possibly additional elements like magnesium that I can put in a very large bucket with an FFM at the bottom. But I do not see myself setting up automatic water changes. In the center we see my kalkwasser dosing, which may seem high, and it does tend to bump my alkalinity and calcium a little bit, but is brought back down with my water changes. I use Tropic Marin salt that naturally has lower levels, and between the two I do have small swings throughout the week, but my pH is definitely benefited from this. I have my other main outputs in a similar situation as previously talked about, so I can quickly see my power usage for each tank as well as the pH and temperature. The temperature looks very volatile, but is only a maximum and minimum within 0.2 or 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, these are situated so it's easy to differentiate my 20-gallon cube, which I always keep on the top of my dashboard, and the frag tank, which is always below that on the dashboard. pH is my biggest thing that I keep an eye on, and that'll bring us to our next topic. So let's talk about some tips and tricks that I use to keep my pH high, as well as my SPS coral growing at a pretty significant rate. First of all, with this quarantine and me being home so often, I tend to just keep my window open. It's a little cold here in Colorado, but I like sleeping in the cold, and during the day it warms up, so it really works out. I'm sure my energy bill is going to be a little bit higher with the heaters running a little bit more often, but it pays for itself in coral growth in my opinion. Secondly, as we talked about earlier, I run my water change with lower nutrients so I can overdo the kalkwasser, tend to end up between 7.5 and 8.0 on my alkalinity. As it drops back down during the water change, it slowly rises throughout. Those are the two things that I'm able to do for my 20-gallon cube, but because it's a smaller tank and has a bunch of SPS frags that are growing really quickly due to a slightly dirtier system with higher nutrients, the extra calc that needs to be dosed to maintain alkalinity levels keeps the pH really high even if I'm not able to have the window open all the time. This next graph shows what happens when my window is closed, and as you can see, the average, minimum, and maximum pH all drop, as it did this last week because it started snowing, and even that's a little bit too cold for me. I try to do my best to keep my window open when possible, and the 20-gallon cube doesn't suffer quite as much, but the frag tank really does with its larger surface area. Last night, when I opened the window back up, everything rose and has continued to stay level or rise throughout the day today. My lights come on about midday, so it takes a little bit longer in the day for my pH to increase compared with other people's tanks. The lines have also started to flatten out this week because I switched from continuous dosing throughout a 24-hour period to only dosing at night. It's because I found that the highest pH was near the end of the day when my lights were starting to dim through when my lights were actually off, and I wanted to bump that maximum towards the most intense photo period, so I tried front-loading my dosing into the beginning of the day, so by the time the lights were on, it started to max out. The last thing I do for my frag tank, that I can only do for my frag tank, but anyone can do with a skimmer, is create a recirculating CO2 scrubber. I bought my CO2 scrubber on bulk group supply, and it was easy to hook up with just a drill bit for the lid, some scissors for the tubing, screws to mount the scrubber, and a Phillips head to help drive those screws. It's a recirculating design that is supposed to use less media, as it takes air that was just pulled into the skimmer and reuses it. Because that air has already been through the scrubber, it'll naturally have less CO2. My skimmer also has small holes in the lid that allow some extra air to enter, as some of the bubbles will be dissolved in the water column of the skimmer. For a while, there was a buildup of water in the scrubber's input line coming out of the skimmer head. For me, that was solved by raising the line and leaning against the back wall, as you see there. I have also seen people use old jars to create a liquid catch that stops any fluid from going back into the scrubber. This project for me was done pretty quickly, but the results have been very beneficial to the tank. If you have any questions about the CO2 scrubber or recirculating design, please put them below. I wasn't going to put this in as it's up front and in everyone's mind currently. Also, our reefs are a good way to get away from the stresses in everyday life, and especially during this current situation. But below I'm going to link some useful resources that haven't really been discussed anywhere. The first one that you can see on the left here is some graphs and charts that you can play around with yourself to look at the data in multiple different ways and try to get a better understanding of the current situation. The second link is new research that's coming out every day, and although it isn't through peer editing yet, because things are happening so quickly, these are papers that are on the front lines and doing as much research as they can. Anyway, please enjoy a video of my tank and some lo-fi hip-hop beats for your quarantine pleasure.